Hello guys, and welcome to part 1 of my Morwaith suggestions. Now, if you're not interested in the video part of this and just want to get straight into the suggestion, there will be a timestamp in the description. But what is the suggestion, what's going on here, etc. So, for those who don't remember, I did a Terraform suggestion not too long ago, probably about 3 months ago, which was my suggestion for all the lands of the Terraform and how they could be improved. Now, this is the same for the Morwaith. All of these brown lines signify a brand new biome. Now, it's not quite true. Some of them are the same biome, but still. Now, but yeah, this is basically meant to be an improvement to the Morwaith faction. There will be probably 3, maybe 4 of these videos, depending on how long each one how long each video is. But yeah, that's basically it. There will be a link down in the description for the actual suggestion on the Lord of the Rings mod forums. If you enjoy the suggestion and want to see it in the game, you need to go there and press either create an account or already have one, and press the little like button on the thing, basically, because that will make the mod team slightly more likely to see it. Okay, so into the actual suggestion. The Morwaith are one of the worst factions in the game. I think they're pretty cool, but they're a terrible faction as it stands. They have the second lowest structure count in the game, ignoring Fangorn, because obviously you're not going to count Fangorn. And they've got 2 huge biomes and literally nothing else. So this suggestion is meant to change that, because the Morwaith are people's first impression of Farhad. They come across the desert or down from the Gulf, and they reach this faraway land, and they hit a really dull faction with very little content. Now, this video is going to focus on the biomes of this update, not necessarily the biome content, so not mobs or plants or specifics of plants necessarily, but the biomes that will be there. Now, according to the Lost Chronicles, which I will leave a link to in the description, which is basically the mod's Farhad lore, because there isn't any in Tolkien. The Morwaith are really easy to put into sub-factions. You have the Northern Morwaith, which inhabit the Arid Grasslands, the Eastern Morwaith, who inhabit the Eastern Grasslands, the Western Morwaith, who inhabit the lands west of the mountains, and the Southern Morwaith, who inhabit the normal grasslands. With that in mind, I'm going to be talking about these biomes one sub-faction at a time, and we are going to start with the Western Morwaith. So, the Western Morwaith feature 3 brand new biomes, and the first of these you can see snaking along the coast. So, lore-wise, the Western Morwaith have been pretty devastated by the Corsairs. There isn't really much left of them as a faction, and so I feel this should be represented some way, besides just the Corsair coasts, which is the land the Corsairs hold, this grey biome on the coastline. So, my suggestion is this little biome that goes around the Corsair coast called the Corsair Devastation. It's basically your standard grasslands, but all destroyed. You know, there's no life there. There's burnt and rotten trees, but it lacks the standard trees of the biomes. There's no life there, no Morwaith. Both Morwaith and Corsair invasions spawn, but they don't spawn there outside of those invasions. So there are some ruins, but generally there aren't many structures here, because, as I say, everyone's dead. It's also, there needs to be some biome between the coast and the grasslands, because it's one of the worst biome transitions in the game. They're both really, really cool looking biomes, the Corsair coast and the Farhad Grasslands, but the transition looks appalling. So this should help with that a little bit. Now, The other two biomes are the Western Arid and Western Normal Grasslands. You see these red lines that split off the Western Morwaith from the southernmost territories. Those are the ones from the Tower Frame suggestion that have stayed in. So, as you can see, it's a fairly small area, and these Western lands are pretty much the same. They've changed a little bit, they've got very little wildlife left. Obviously, these are new biomes for the purposes of the sub-faction, but you might as well go with it. So, there's very few wildlife left, only zebras, which the Morwaith have kept to ride and to fight. But otherwise, the Corsairs have taken everything else. So, it's a pretty barren land that is basically pretty sad. Now, that's it for the Western Morwaith. So, what about the Eastern Morwaith, which I am doing next, because I'm doing this in sort of size order. So, the Eastern Morwaith bring with them 4 brand new biomes, the most noticeable of which, when looking at this map, is probably that of Hanin Dare. It is still called Hanin Dare, right? No. So, Hanin Dare was the old name for this biome, but in the latest so in this screenshot that I've got up here, this is called Hanin Dare, but it has since been renamed to Nin Hecharad. So this biome would be called Nin Hecharad, which are the Great Lakes where the Eastern Morwaith have their greatest settlements. So it's got it's very populated compared to the grasslands, and has a few of the bigger structures, which obviously I'll talk about in the second video, only spawn here, because this is, you know, the big centre of activity and all that. It's got much more trees and lakes, because it's generally a wetter biome because of the 2 big lakes. So you got more lake variants, more forest variants, and more trees in the standard variant. And it's got a few more hills just to try and make it look a bit different, and because it's cool. And it's got fewer boulders, because obviously this land is more settled, so they'd have basically nicked more of the boulders for building. There should be a couple unique flowers here, which I will go in more detail in the second video. And I'll talk about some unique trees and flowers that would spawn here. The other one is this little island, which, as you can see, gets its own waypoint. Waypoints are discussed a bit later, but there's this little waypoint here. And I've called this island Tor Harederin, but I'm not very good at Sindarin. I've probably butchered that pronunciation, for example, which just means Isle of the Southern Forest, or Southern Isle of the Forest, or Southern Forest Isle. You get the point. But this would be a very forested island, just sat there. Think that island in the Sea of Rune. It's just a forested island. We'll get back to the trees and the mobs that live there, but it's pretty uninhabited. There's one mob that spawns there. Spoiler alert, it's a hippo. And there's only one type of NPC who spawns there as well. Then we go south to what I have called Ailin de Gore, or just Battle Lake, named for the fact it's right on the border of Pedorogwaith, so there's going to be a lot of fighting with the half-trolls. So, Battle Lake seems to fit to me. It's got the lightest biome tint of any of the grasslands to create this idea that is sort of very pretty and wet because it's surrounded by the forest. And it's got most of the structures that the Eastern Morwaith have. So there'll be a couple that are in Ailin de Gore and Nin Hecharad, but not the standard grasslands. And I've put a waypoint on this little area just next to the lake. I don't know what you'd call the waypoint, probably Ailin de Gore, just after the lake, but you could come up with some great big Morwaith meeting place or something like that. And then the final biome is the Eastern Morwaith Grasslands, which you can see this big line down here. and then it follows the river. So obviously you can't see the river to its end here, but it follows the river down this line through the Gates of Fire and just along the river and above the mangroves. So that way the Eastern Morwaith are a pretty big faction, and they've got a fair amount of stuff. And because, lore-wise, they are the ones who do most of the Mumak transfer. The Bridge of Haraduin, I believe this waypoint is called, is basically where the Southern Morwaith sell it on to the Eastern Morwaith. So they've basically got to have that. Yeah. So, next are the Southern Morwaith, who also feature 4 new biomes, but have bigger map changes, so I've put them next. Now, the Southern Now, I'm going to actually do this in a slightly different order to the script, and start with the biome that isn't new, but has featured some changes, the Gates of Fire. Now, I don't believe... basically, the current Gates of Fire are pretty disappointing, to be blunt. They're not very exciting. They're just a volcano biome like you find in Pedoragwaith, which also means half-troll spawn there. They basically suck. So, I'd like to see a lot of changes, but the first of these is to move the biome out there. Both these 2 blocks are meant to be the Gates of Fire, so they reach across both rivers. They'd also be taller, and its own biome. Now, obviously, I'll get back to it being its own. I'll get back to its own biome in being just a second, because it should also have its name. Basically, like you see up here, Emin Heharad and the Harad Mountains. You should also have Gates of Fire. Yeah, it would be fairly small writing, but I think it would be cool. So I think the Gates of Fire should be much bigger. They should have their own rock type, which is darker. So almost like the Rift Valley in Ethiopia, which is full of small dark volcanoes. And there'd be no dead trees or half-trolls there to ruin the biome. Yeah. That's pretty much it for the Gates of Fire. So let's talk about some actual new biomes, because we have 4 of them. We have 3 of them. I have no idea how I counted 4 in the actual suggestion. I assume I included the Gates of Fire. Oops. So, let's start up north with the floodplains. Now, we're told the Southern Morwaith reach as high up as the upper floodplains. But, of course, floodplains don't look like a savanna. So, the floodplains would look a bit different. They'd be sort of halfway between the swamp at Chunha and the standard grassland. Now, I go into a lot more detail into exactly how the floodplains would work in the Southern Morwaith section, which will probably be video 3. But, so, we'll have to see about that then, because there's a lot going on here. But basically, for now, think between a swamp and a grassland. Now we'll talk about the actual important biomes for the faction. Nanhanagorath and the Fertile Valley. Now, Nanhanagorath is this one here, with the waypoint in the centre. It's this big battleground, which is pretty it's basically what was the centre of the Fertile Valley, but it's been a battleground between the Morwaith and the Tower Thrym for generations. Absolutely generations. So, the Nanhanagorath would be a bit like the Aelin Dagor of the South. It's got lots and lots of settlements. It's got a very light tint. It's got a lot of flowers and many trees. So it's got a lot of trees in the standard variation, but you don't have forest variations very often. So it's not like all the way there to being the truly fertile valley anymore, but it's quite close. The fertile valley itself is this sort of banana-shaped thing across the river, and also this little section here. This Bridge of Haraduin waypoint has moved north, so it's on the eastern Morwaith side, so there isn't a waypoint in this area. Obviously, it's got the river as its northern border, as does Nanhanagorath, and the fertile valley is, well, it's a fertile valley. It's got very common lakes, many kind of trees, lots of fruit trees, and a couple of unique ones, which we'll talk about in the Southern Morwaith video. And there should be a new berry as well, which I'll again talk about in more detail in the Southern Morwaith section. So that's actually it for all of the new biomes. But as you can see, there are a lot of new waypoints in the Southern Morwaith. So let's quickly talk about them, because I mentioned all of the ones in the Eastern Morwaith lands. So let's talk about the Southern Morwaith ones. So there's one at the centre of the Fertile Valley, as you would expect, just to give that biome a waypoint. I imagine, so this is actually Yuck's, what did I call it? I'm sorry, I'm very professional. I've trying to find the spot on the suggestion. Yes, there it is. Yuck's Par. I was right. So, Yuck's Par would have a road, which I haven't drawn up here, going from Shaman Par, which is this Taurithrim one in the north, and over to Nanhanagorath. So it's an old ruined Taurithrim road, basically, and it would give a road to the centre of the Morwaith and give them a nice waypoint in the middle. There'd be this one here, which is the fork, the birth, what did I call it? The fork of the Haraduin, which gives an easy way to access the Fertile Valley as soon as you've entered the grasslands, so you don't have to do all that running on your own. There's another one over at the Clouded Forest called the Rasduin, named after the big mountain. So that's the name of this river, named after the Ras, which is this big mountain runs here. It also gives access to the Clouded Forest, which is a super cool biome in the mod. And then you actually need a new waypoint out in the east, because there's just nothing out there. So I don't actually know what to call this one, but I imagine something along the lines of High Plains or something like that could work fairly easily. There's also this new one in the lower floodplains, which just means you've got an extra one in the floodplains, because it's a very big biome to only have one waypoint. And that is it for the Southern Morwaith map. So, what about the north? Because the north is where there's a lot to say. So, let's start. So, the Northern Morwaith are the Arid Grassland and Emin Hecharad, which gives them a whole 2 biomes, and I'm not even sure if Morwaith actually spawn in Emin Hecharad. So, yeah. So we're going to start with the Southron Hunting Grounds, which is the land between these 3 rivers. So it's from this desert waypoint here, all the way down to here. So the Adrainan tributaries all here. And this waypoint, this area is the Southron Hunting Grounds, which is an area where the Southrons live. Basically, they're not really the Neharad faction. They're just a few hunters, mostly Golfling and Nomad, who come into this area and do some hunting. There's also some Southron wildlife here, the camels, that have come to live here, to make it very distinct. And then, oh yeah, it's not quite just this area, because there's this area here under, I think that's Isem Uzas, this little desert waypoint. There's another one just here, just this spot here. And then there is, so next we're going to go talk about the Hill of the Sun, which is this waypoint here, the Hills of the Sun. Well, why not make some actual hills? So these are the Farhad Hot Hills, these two. They're desert hills. They give you heat damage unless you're wearing the standard stuff, and a new set, which will be included in the Northern Morwaith section. And the Farhad Hot Grasslands, which aren't the hills, and are just grassland versions. So the hills are almost like the half desert, mostly of sand and clay with some redstone and sand. Oh, not some redstone, sorry, some red sand and sandstone. And they've got very steep sides, but they're pretty flat when you get to the top. So that makes them look, you know, not just like another set of hills. So it's pretty cool. There's absolutely nothing living here. And then you've got on the map, just written over it, Emin Anor, which literally just means Hills of the Sun. The Farhad Hot Grasslands are Farhad Hot Grasslands are basically just that, but not hilly. They're a bit more lively than that. They're sort of halfway between the Arid Grasslands and the Hills of the Sun. And yeah, so that's it for this area, because you've got a cool waypoint, and there's some cool content over here that we will get to in the Northern Morwaith section. But for now, I'm going to scoot along to this brand new river. Now you might ask, why have you added this river? What does it add? And I would say to you, well, first off, an excuse for a new waypoint in the Emin Heikarad, but more importantly, a big biome distinction under the Emin Heikarad. So you've got this brand new biome called the Morwaith Heikarad. I seriously apologise for my Cinderin. The Morwaith Heikarad means in the shadow of the distant hills. So the idea is, it's the biome protected under the Heikarad. Someone can probably better my Cinderin. But most big Morwaith settlements are apparently north of the hills, so I assume that means in this kind of area. So some of the big structures wouldn't spawn here. And it would have very sparse forests. And baobabs would spawn occasionally in the standard variant, just to make the whole biome look and feel a bit different. But it's pretty well inhabited with wildlife, and there's also a new mob, the buffalo, which we'll get into later. There's some new waypoints, the birth of the Haraduin, which is here, which just gives you one on the western side. And one at the lake, which I have called Aelin Tave Emin, or Lake Held by the Hills. But yeah, it's not super great Cinderin. If anyone can improve my Cinderin, please do let me know in the comments of this video or on the suggestion. It's surrounded by the Heikarad, so it's a nice. That's kind of what I'm referencing in the name, and it gives a waypoint on the eastern side. Because obviously you've got the floodplains if you want to just go up to the south. You've also got the waypoint over here in the Heikarad for the river. Now the Emin Heikarad themselves, because I think they should get their own biome. So I'm counting all this area, including these hills here, as part of the Emin Heikarad. So the two main blocks should get their own biome. So this area will stay as Arid Hills. Just because otherwise there's no point in making it all a new biome, because they're all the Arid Hills in the world. So you'd just be changing the biome instead of actually adding a new one. So It's got fairly, usual amount of animals, plus the buffalo. Morwaith don't spawn here because the hills are super sacred, so they don't want to live here. There's 2 waypoints here, actually, which is one here at the birth of the Haraduan. I think I've actually called it the source of the Haraduan. Yes, I have. Which gives you one up in the east, and the Heikir, or distant stream, which is this new river I've added, and the waypoint I talked about earlier to give you one in the east. And that means all the 4 waypoints here are really spread out. They are super far away from each other. And there we have just one last biome left, and it is the Lion's Grasslands. I've actually called these hills Emin Horo, the Hills of the Lion, because this is the Lion's Grasslands. The area of Arid, so this is yellower with more lakes, so there are more lakes here, but there are very few forests. But it's got a lot of shrubs, so it's like, like your shrubland variants, more than your standard variants. You don't get Ryans or buffalo, but all the rest of the grassland animals appear, with one new one, a Nimror, which is basically a big cave lion, which will be very important when we come to video 3, or possibly 4, of the Northern Morwaith, because this has taken me 26 minutes. Structures here are very different, so we'll come back to those later. But there is one waypoint called Nan Hrawoth, or Valley of the Great Lion, which also reflects when the Morwaith were being renamed, and everyone for some reason voted Morwaith instead of Rauhoth, which was clearly a better name. And so this is kind of a nod to that. And then I've just added a waypoint to the eastern side to help give waypoints everywhere, and that is Anat and Bettina, or roughly Gate of the Roads in Haradric. Haradric is not a language we know a ton about, so that was my best attempt. But if you're a Tolkien language person, feel free to correct me. So it's a Gulfling watchpost on the road to make sure the Mumaks are moving, and that just helps bring it all together. The last thing is this Arid Grassland around the hills, the Gates of Fire, is hot grassland, so that the Northern Morwaith don't spawn there instead. And it also just looks nicer. And that is it. That is the whole thing for my map suggestion. It's been a big one, but yeah, that is all I have to say about the Morwaith map. The next video, which if you're accessing this through the suggestion, should be directly below this one, will be the Western and Eastern Morwaith, probably, and then there'll probably be a video each for the Southern and Northern ones. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.